Hello, I'm John Lang, Professor of Communication at Southern Oregon State College. Here in the Pacific Northwest, during the last 10 years, we have witnessed one of the most difficult and contentious of all environmental conflicts that this country has seen. As someone who's studied environmental conflict for quite some time now, it has sometimes seemed to me that the differences over what should be the fate of the forests of the Pacific Northwest might in fact be irreconcilable. It was in this atmosphere that some residents of the Applegate Watershed, located in southwestern Oregon and northern California, got together to try to find enough common ground whereby they could find solutions through focusing on forest and community health. The outcome was the formation of a 9-member group called the Applegate Partnership. I've had the opportunity and the challenge to facilitate the partnership's work. The 9-member board consists of representatives from the environmental and timber communities, the Forest Service, the BLM, as well as the community. They've been helped by other interested community members, including farmers, ranchers, Native Americans, and others who have an interest. And it's difficult work. They struggle with the uncertainties of finding new ways of planning and implementing forest management. I'm cautiously hopeful that if the Applegate Partnership can continue to elevate the health of the physical ecosystem and the well-being of the community above any particular position that someone takes, then the partnership might be able to find local solutions to this seemingly impossible conflict. We'll see.
I think what we're really talking about is a social issue. And how are we going to live together as a society?
I think that partnership is just about people coming back to trying to find a cooperative, collaborative approach to life.
I described it one time like kind of an awkward dance, that none of us know the steps, and the music is real internal, and that all of us have a music of hope.
In the past, it's been us and them, you know, and now it's we, it's all of us together.
So maybe here, the notion of conflict and its limitations happened first, and we've started to try to take the next step towards cooperation.
The real power and the real strength comes from people being able to step forward and say, hey, wait a minute, we can find peace.
It very definitely was. Yes, it was hard to sit down and talk to the people that were ultimately their bottom line was to put me out of business and put my company out. That was their bottom line, and has been for the last 7 or 8 years. So it was difficult to sit down with those people.
I think the first thing that came out, well, it was the first thing that came out of Dwayne's mouth is you're walking a fine line with me, you son of a bitch, you know, and so that was kind of where that began.
At first, I was really dubious. I'm like all the other farmers in this valley. I was really suspicious, and my guard really went up. Anytime you suggest anything about environmentalists, we all think that you're after our water or our land or something, you know.
I thought to myself, this could never work. I said, how can these people with such diverse interests really be able to sit down and agree to anything? And I guess it's like anything else. You have to take that first step, and once you've taken that first step, the second one is a little easier.
Sure, we all come to this table with a bias, whether it's from our organizational connections or our personal biases, and we try to acknowledge them and then go beside them.
I learned a great deal, and have learned a great deal, from what people have said at this table about what goes on in their various communities.
We got to the point where we just had to sit down and start talking. We got to the point where there was something in it for everybody to start talking. And once we started talking, we started seeing we had a lot in common. And once we started seeing what we had in common, we could start building on that.
At the base of it, people really did have this sort of common love and need for a forest that was healthy and intact. And that really formed the sort of foundation. When people all saw that, then they could say, yeah, I think maybe we do have this overarching common set of values or visions that we can work towards. Now, we may not necessarily agree about how you get there, but at least we know that initially our sort of end goal is the same.
And once you get agreement, then you can get beyond some of the barriers and deal with people as individuals rather than as a timber industry representative or environmental representative or Forest Service. We're individual people with our own beliefs, and we learn to accept that.
And I think what we're finding is that those people we've perceived as enemies for so long really are just like us. Is that they just have a different perception, and what we need to do is really start working toward communicating with each other. I mean, really communicating with each other so that we understand where each other lies instead of these broad brush generalities that we seem to work with.
I think that because conflict is familiar, it's difficult sometimes to stay in touch with what the issue is at hand and to deal with that in a clean and appropriate way. And the conflict between environmentalists and timber industry, and certainly between agency and community, and agency and environmentalists and agency and industry, I think the sense of distrust feeds that conflict that makes it very hard to focus on the issues. And that's one thing that we try to do in the partnership is to address issues as they come up as straight as we can.
And that's really important to accomplish anything. And I think that trust will come in time. Because without that, then you're back just looking at paper and a bunch of stuff that, in my estimation, hasn't worked so well. My opinion against yours, and my expert against yours, and my law against your guideline, sort of. That is frustrating for everybody. I admit that. But it also is a process that people have gotten into that's hard to get out of.
Total trust yet in the Applegate Partnership has not been achieved yet, but it's certainly a lot further down the road than it was when we started.
Trust was certainly the objective from the beginning, but you can't magically create it. The only way you can build it is by sitting together a lot and by going through all kinds of issues and by seeing each other in our sort of worst moods and behaviors and almost giving up and not, and witnessing another person's real deep pain and fear and not turning away.
I am scared to death. We're not going to make it to retirement because everything is going to come falling down around us. I mean, it's disaster time. We put our farm, who's been in my family for, we have 5 generations there. We put it on the market. We're going to sell it. We can't keep it without the timber job.
Just the time spent at the same table in a listening mode where we're genuinely trying to understand where each other are coming from and hearing ideas, I think begins to develop the seeds of trust. And then I think as we're getting projects laid out on the ground, and that's what we're in the midst of now. And I think people have a sense of trust as they're seeing things get on the ground the way that they had envisioned.
I think that it would be really taking a step backward for us not to take some steps forward and doing it in a manner that we have laid out from day one that we're going to do it the right way.
Just like trust, wisdom about how to manage an ecosystem only comes from time. And that if we were wise enough to support a system in which people could build a base of experiential knowledge about how a system should be managed, we would have better forest management, not worse.
The essence of the project is that instead of managing the Applegate Watershed, which is about 800 square miles of land across multiple ownerships, that instead of managing it for strictly a single resource like timber or recreation, that we really manage the forest, and not just the forest, but all of the lands, with a concern about the entire ecosystem across the landscape. And we start to address forest health issues first, and then we use the tools like timber extraction and what have you to help solve the forest health problems. Instead of arbitrarily laying an ASQ over the top of a piece of land and saying this amount of timber has to come off of this land, not knowing what that land is capable of producing. And instead, let's find out what the land can produce, what are our concerns and health problems, what are our habitat problems, what are our extreme and tributary problems, what are our fish problems, what are our social problems, and then throw that all in the pot and then say, okay, now how can we solve these problems?
Before it was resource extraction was the #1 thing. Now it's how do we maintain and develop certain types of resources out there that we want? How do we develop and maintain old growth? And so I think that we're asking a different type of question and looking at it from a different way now.
It's mainly an integration of, say, sciences rather than departmentalizing what we do and kind of not talking to one another. It's an integration of social needs with what we do. It's an integration of, say, economic reality.
On the one side, we're doing an ecological assessment to try to understand what the whole dynamics of this ecosystem that we're working with are. And on the other side, we've started a community assessment so that we can get a sense of what is the existing base of folks, what are their skills and abilities, what are their interests, what are their issues, and how do those relate to what we're learning about the ecosystem. So specifically, maybe we're learning in the ecosystem that we have these drastically overstocked stands, you know, and that we have all this material that needs to be taken out just to promote forest health. And that's going to create a flow of products out into the community. Well, does the skill of the existing resource-based worker and the technology they have available correspond to what we need to have done out there? And if not, how do we augment it so that it can? And in terms of the products, does our existing infrastructure of industry, can they use this new flow of materials that's going to come out? Or do they need some support in retooling and retraining so that they can create a whole new series of products? So in a sense, we're learning, okay, what kind of changes are going on in the ecosystem? And what are our existing conditions in the community, and how do we bring those two things together?
I'm not sure about all the ways. We're going to have to invent new ways. It's not very economically viable presently with the equipment we got, but that doesn't mean we can't get new equipment, and that's what all these scientists are for. That's what everybody's here for, is to figure out the best way to do it. We're ingenious. Human beings are ingenious. They come to the fore when it's time.
We talk a lot about special forest products now. We see all sorts of miscellaneous type vegetation that has a value that we really haven't encouraged from an entrepreneurial standpoint. We want to be able to have the people that live and work in this environment also be supported by the environment. And that's where the creation of jobs, that's where looking at a total ecosystem base and looking at a total ecological and economic base to try to get the most we can out of this region and to sustain and support the people that live in it.
There's no reason why we can't have both jobs and community viability, economically speaking, and forest health. There's no reason we can't do it. We've got the understanding to do that. We need the will to do it. And we need the respect that must be developed in Western culture toward other life forms, the right of those forms to exist.
A healthy forest has healthy critters. We have a healthy environment if we have a healthy forest. If we're managing for all species, timber and all species of wildlife, fish, the whole picture is going to look much different than it ever did before. And it's going to be a lot easier for the people who are against timber harvest to see it occurring and yet enhancing the whole big picture.
The long-term hope is to actually have healthy forests, to have a stable timber supply, to have stability in our communities, that we have some stable employment base, and to try and get back to some semblance of peace in our communities and feel like we can kind of all agree. We might not like exactly every single thing that happens, but that we can generally agree on what we want our forests to look like and get back to being a community instead of being so divided.
What I see is that the partnership is composed of people with just about every kind of attitude and every kind of thought process you can think of. And I think that the integration of that is what's going to keep us moving in the right direction, which is on one side a little bit of, or a lot of humility, and another side the need to have some control over our lives socially and economically. And that's what's so neat about the partnership, is that I see that people from, say, both sides coming together and following a path that is right for a great majority of the people.
I'd hate to go over and sit in that corner with 3 other people and listen to you guys all over talking.
I think we can keep it on a level where the whole group's...
The area has been identified that we're talking about as an adaptive management area, and it's really, it's interesting to kind of look at this group, and it's almost as if this is kind of an adaptive management group as we keep changing, you know, week to week and day to day. We keep asking ourselves, you know, where are we going? And we say, well, we know we're going in that direction, but it's, you know, we don't know specifically. I guess to define what we are is probably a group of really concerned people who are willing to find solution.
We're working awfully hard at it, but I don't think we know any more than anyone else how to make this work. I think we have some extraordinary people who are very committed to this and are very committed to making the partnership work.
I guess I believe if people sit down with some basic ideas that it will work, that it can work, that there is room, and that you're not bringing hateful attitudes or attitudes that don't move off a dead center. I think that it can be a lot easier than it's been.
I genuinely believe that if people come together that live together, and you also, of course, have representatives of national interest by virtue of the people who live in the community also share some of those values at a national level. And I think if those folks can come together along with whatever managing agencies and really talk about what kind of legacy they want to leave for the future, then I think community-based solutions are possible.
We need to learn the communities that we work in. We need to find the communication techniques and skills to allow the community to let us know before we put anything on the drawing board what it is they want. And then it's just a continuous process of going back and forth, showing them where we are, inviting them into the process, bringing it back to them, and changing as we go along, being adaptive.
You know, people use that for ceremonial use, and it gets a lot of different uses.
That's where if we hadn't come out and started talking to you, we might not know.
Right.
We'd say, hey, it looks like people are up there, but we wouldn't know what the value of that trail or that little viewpoint is.
What the partnership will begin to do for us is to recognize different ways of interacting with our communities and different ways of talking to people and networking that will be much more effective. So I think that will be a direction that the partnership will do, is to help spark not only the agencies interacting with the communities, but also the communities themselves, residents working together in a more productive way.
In the past, it's been us and them, you know, and now it's we, it's all of us together. And I really believe that they have made a difference in that people are realizing that this is the new way of thinking, and that we can all live in harmony. And that's the credit I give the Applegate Partnership.
What we're talking about here really isn't very sophisticated, and it's not very, you know, it's not like high tech. It's kind of old stuff. In fact, it's old common sense stuff that I think, you know, probably the pioneers had to rely on community to, you know, or not survive.
What the partnership is really most importantly about is giving the community a chance to relearn how to work together and learning again how to trust one another and how to build positive and constructive relationships across the different interests.
I feel like I can never really go back. I can't go back to seeing neighbors and community in the same way. I can't go back and see the agencies that are across the boundaries from us as somebody separate that we shouldn't work with in a totally different way. I can't go back to thinking of decision making as something that, because I'm the ranger, I'm in charge. I feel like there'll always be the sense now that to have this be the best decision is really to share that decision making at a larger level, at a wider spectrum. So the sense of boundarylessness and shared accountability really and listening to people in a different way, I think that I'm significantly changed.
I hope there's always a need for something like the partnership, whether it's this one or another one, because it really does force people to sit down and work together face to face. It brings that human element in, and I hope we don't ever get away from that.
It takes a lot of patience, and it takes tremendous commitment from each of the participants, and it takes sharing a lot of yourself to be able to make it work.
I think that we're much more similar than we are different. Although we perceive all the differences in one another, we emphasize the differences. It's almost like we've prided ourselves in our differences, kind of a John Wayne independent mentality. And that there's tremendous opportunity for us to work together for a solution. And I guess if you could term it in a word, I'd say partnership.
And this is on or off the record, I don't care.
Oh, we got him going now. You get this on tape.
Quite frankly, if you put it on tape and you use it, you'll be using it for me. Because we might get somebody, with a little common sense to listen to it.
Chris and I like to tease each other. That's one thing that's kind of fun. And we're both kind of scrappers, so we're good at...
Well, she'd only give in, We could do it overnight.
What was it?
Decide, announce and defend.
Or disappear, one of the two.
Oh, defend if you can, and then disappear.
BLM and Forest Service work together often.
Oh, yeah?
Like what?
We learned all this in the sandbox. It was how to cooperate. We learned it in kindergarten, and we forgot it.
We lost it.
We lost it.
I'd rather fight than switch.
Some of us kept banging our buddies with a shovel in the sandbox, and we kept doing it all the rest of our life. And now
my black eye? We've done it.
It's a wrap.